"Don't you dare sit at my table acting like you contribute anything to this house," my dad shouted, his voice cutting through the Christmas dinner conversation like a knife. The room fell silent as his words echoed off the dining room walls. My cousin Beverly and her husband Jacob froze mid-bite, their forks suspended in the air. The smell of roasted turkey and cranberry sauce suddenly felt overwhelming, and all I could feel was the crushing weight of his judgment pressing down on me. My name is Lucy Thompson. I'm 32 years old, and I had been living in my childhood home in Norfolk, Virginia, for the past 14 months. What started as a temporary arrangement to help my father Kenneth after my mother passed away had become something I never expected. I thought I was being a good daughter, stepping in during his time of need while I rebuilt my financial consulting career. But sitting there on Christmas Day, listening to him call me names in front of our family, I realized how wrong I had been about everything. Since moving back home in October of last year, I had been quietly managing the household finances while Kenneth believed he was supporting a deadbeat daughter. Every month, I transferred $3,400 from my consulting business to cover his mortgage, utilities, insurance, and other expenses. Kenneth's retirement income barely covered groceries and his medication, but his pride prevented him from admitting the financial strain. Instead, he convinced himself and anyone who would listen that I was the one taking advantage of his generosity. "You sit around this house all day pretending to work on that computer," Kenneth continued, his face red with anger. "Real people have real jobs, not whatever fantasy you call employment." Beverly shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly embarrassed by the outburst. Jacob cleared his throat and tried to change the subject, but Kenneth wasn't finished. "I've been supporting this parasite for over a year, and what do I get? Attitude and disrespect." The word parasite hung in the air like poison. I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation, not just from his words, but from the realization that this was how he truly saw me. All those months of quietly ensuring his bills were paid, his house stayed warm, and his life remained comfortable meant nothing to him. He had waited until after all the December bills were safely covered, until after I had made sure his Christmas would be worry-free, before delivering this devastating blow. The timing wasn't coincidental. It was calculated cruelty that revealed exactly what he thought of my sacrifices. As I sat there absorbing his verbal assault, something shifted inside me. The hurt and embarrassment began transforming into something else entirely. I wasn't just dealing with an ungrateful father anymore. I was facing someone who had systematically undermined and humiliated me while depending on my financial support. This Christmas dinner was about to become the last meal I would ever subsidize for someone who confused my generosity with weakness. The path that led me to that Christmas table had begun with the best of intentions. When my mother Patricia died suddenly from a heart attack in September of last year, Kenneth was devastated. At 68 years old, he had never managed the household finances. My mother had handled all the bills, insurance, and financial planning. I found him 2 weeks after the funeral sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by unopened mail, completely overwhelmed and too proud to ask for help. "I can figure this out," he had insisted when I offered assistance. "I don't need anyone taking over my business." But as I sorted through the stack of overdue notices and threatening letters from creditors, it became clear that Kenneth's monthly retirement check of $1,800 wouldn't cover the $2,800 mortgage payment, let alone utilities, insurance, and other expenses. My mother's part-time income had been essential to their survival, and without it, Kenneth was headed for financial disaster. That's when I made the decision to move back home temporarily. I had been building my financial consulting practice in Richmond, working with small businesses to optimize their cash flow and investment strategies. The beauty of consulting work was its flexibility. I could serve my clients remotely while helping Kenneth navigate this difficult transition. At least that was the plan. "You can stay in your old room until you get back on your feet," Kenneth had said, making it clear he saw this as charity rather than assistance. I didn't correct him. Instead, I quietly took over all the utility accounts, putting them in my name for better credit terms and payment flexibility. I arranged automatic transfers for the mortgage, insurance, and other bills, ensuring everything would be covered without Kenneth having to worry about the details. The arrangement should have been temporary, but as months passed, I realized Kenneth had no interest in understanding his financial situation. He preferred the illusion that his retirement income was sufficient, even as I covered the shortfall month after month. My consulting business thrived during this period. Working from home allowed me to take on more clients and increase my income significantly. By Christmas, I was earning nearly $6,000 monthly, more than enough to support both households. But Kenneth saw only what he wanted to see. His daughter lounging around his house, working irregular hours on a computer, contributing nothing while he provided shelter and food. He complained constantly about my schedule, questioning why I wasn't in an office like normal people, and suggesting I needed to find real work instead of whatever I was doing online. His friends heard these complaints during their coffee shop gatherings, reinforcing his belief that he was being taken advantage of by an ungrateful child. The warning signs had been building for weeks before Christmas. Kenneth's comments became sharper, his criticism more pointed. He made jokes about having a professional house guest and asked pointed questions about when I planned to find my own place. I attributed his behavior to holiday stress and grief, never imagining he would orchestrate such a public humiliation right after ensuring his December bills were safely covered. Now, sitting at this Christmas table listening to him call me a parasite, I understood that Kenneth's resentment wasn't about money or space. It was about control and pride. He needed to believe he was the provider, the strong father figure, even if that meant vilifying the daughter who was actually keeping him afloat. "I want you out of my house tonight," Kenneth declared, his voice rising with each word. "I'm tired of supporting someone who shows no appreciation for what I've done." The finality in his tone cut through the last remnants of Christmas cheer hanging over the dinner table. Beverly's eyes widened in shock, and Jacob reached for his wife's hand, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating confrontation. "Kenneth, maybe this isn't the time," Jacob started, but my father cut him off with a sharp wave of his hand. "This is exactly the time," Kenneth snapped. "I've been patient for over a year, and I'm done. She can find somewhere else to freeload." He turned back to me, his eyes cold and determined. "Pack your things tonight. I won't spend another day supporting someone who contributes nothing to this household." I sat there for a moment, processing the full scope of his demands. Kenneth wasn't just asking me to leave eventually. He wanted me gone immediately, on Christmas Day, after making sure I had covered all his December expenses first. The calculated nature of his timing became crystal clear. He had waited until his mortgage payment was secure, his utilities were current, and his holiday celebration was fully funded before delivering this ultimatum. "You're absolutely right," I said quietly, standing up from the table. My calmness seemed to surprise everyone, including Kenneth, who had probably expected tears or arguments. "I shouldn't stay where I'm not wanted or appreciated." Beverly looked between us, clearly sensing something was wrong, but unable to identify what. "Lucy, maybe you two should talk about this privately." "No need," I interrupted gently. "My father has made his position very clear. I'll have my things packed within the hour." I looked directly at Kenneth, whose expression had shifted from anger to something that might have been confusion. "I hope you enjoy the independence you've been craving." As I walked toward the stairs, Kenneth called after me, "And don't think you can come crawling back when reality hits. I'm done enabling your lazy lifestyle." His words followed me up the steps, each one cementing my resolve about what needed to happen next. In my old bedroom, I quickly gathered my belongings, mostly just clothes and my laptop. 14 months of living here, and I had accumulated remarkably little. Everything important was already digital or portable. As I packed, I could hear Kenneth downstairs, probably justifying his actions to Beverly and Jacob, painting himself as the long-suffering father finally taking a stand against his ungrateful daughter. What Kenneth didn't realize was that his Christmas gift to me, this moment of brutal clarity about exactly what he thought of my sacrifices, was about to become the most expensive present he'd ever given anyone. By demanding his independence so emphatically, he was about to get exactly what he asked for, including the financial reality that came with it. I zipped up my suitcase and took one last look around the room where I'd spent my teenage years. Tomorrow morning, Kenneth would discover what true independence actually cost, and I would finally understand the difference between being generous and being taken for granted. I drove to the Hampton Inn near Norfolk International Airport and checked into a room for the night. As I sat on the hotel bed with my laptop open, the full weight of what had just happened began to settle in. Kenneth had thrown me out on Christmas Day, calling me a parasite in front of our family, completely unaware that I had been his financial lifeline for over a year. The irony was almost laughable, except nothing about this situation felt funny. My phone buzzed with a text from Beverly. "Are you okay? That was really harsh. Do you want to talk?" I appreciated her concern, but this wasn't something that could be resolved with a family intervention. Kenneth had revealed his true feelings about my presence in his life, and now it was time for him to experience the reality of those feelings. I opened my banking app and began systematically reviewing every automatic payment I had set up over the past 14 months. The mortgage payment of $2,800, due on the 1st of each month. The electric bill averaging $250. Gas heating that ran another $180 during winter months. Water and sewer services, internet, phone, homeowners insurance, property taxes. The list went on and on. Kenneth's name wasn't on a single account because his credit score couldn't qualify for the competitive rates I had secured. The timing of his outburst was particularly revealing. Tomorrow was December 26th, meaning all the January bills would start arriving within days. The mortgage payment would be due January 1st, followed quickly by all the utility bills that would reflect December's heavy holiday usage. Kenneth had no idea what was coming, because he had never bothered to learn the details of his own household expenses. I called the mortgage company first. "This is Lucy Thompson regarding account number 44789823. I need to remove the automatic payment authorization effective immediately." The customer service representative was efficient and professional, confirming that no future payments would be processed from my account. Kenneth's name was on the deed, but he had never been involved in the payment arrangements. Next came the utility companies. Norfolk Electric Cooperative. This is Lucy Thompson, account holder for 347 Maple Street. I'm closing this account effective tomorrow, December 26th. Each call followed the same pattern. Polite explanations that I was no longer responsible for the address. Professional confirmations that services would be disconnected according to standard procedures. The gas company scheduled disconnection for December 27th. The water department would shut off service December 28th. Internet and cable would be discontinued December 29th. I had structured the disconnection strategically, ensuring Kenneth would feel the impact gradually rather than all at once. He had called me a parasite who contributed nothing. Now he could discover exactly what nothing looked like. My phone rang while I was canceling the homeowner's insurance. Beverly's name appeared on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to explain myself to family members who had witnessed Kenneth's cruelty, but would inevitably pressure me to be the bigger person and fix this situation. Kenneth was 68 years old, not a child who needed protection from the consequences of his actions. The final call was to my business insurance provider, canceling the additional coverage I had purchased to protect my equipment while working from Kenneth's house. As I hung up, I felt a strange sense of completion. In less than 2 hours, I had dismantled the entire financial structure that had kept Kenneth's life comfortable and stable for over a year. I ordered room service and opened my laptop to review my consulting client schedules for the coming week. Life would continue, and probably improve significantly now that I wasn't subsidizing someone who saw my generosity as evidence of personal failure. Kenneth wanted independence, and tomorrow morning he would begin learning what that word really meant when it came with a $2,800 mortgage payment and winter heating bills he couldn't afford. As I settled in for the night, I wondered how long it would take him to realize that his parasite had actually been the only thing standing between him and financial catastrophe. I woke up early on December 26th and drove to a coffee shop in downtown Norfolk to work on client reports. The familiar routine of analyzing financial data and developing strategic recommendations felt grounding after yesterday's emotional upheaval. My phone had several missed calls from Kenneth, but I ignored them. If he wanted to discuss anything, he could do so after experiencing a few days of the independence he had demanded so forcefully. Around 10 in the morning, Beverly called. "Lucy, your dad is panicking. The power went out at his house this morning and he can't reach the electric company. Do you know anything about this?" Her voice carried a mix of concern and suspicion, as if she suspected I might be connected to Kenneth's sudden utility problems. "The electric company disconnects service for non-payment," I replied calmly, continuing to type on my laptop. Maybe he should check his account status. I wasn't lying. Kenneth's name had never been on the electric account, so when I closed it yesterday, the company followed standard procedure for vacant properties. "But the power was fine yesterday during dinner," Beverly protested. "This doesn't make sense. He's been living there for 30 years. "Have you suggested he call the utility company directly?" I asked. "They'll be able to explain their policies better than I can." I could hear the frustration in Beverly's voice, but I wasn't ready to reveal the full scope of Kenneth's financial dependency. He had chosen to air our family business in front of everyone yesterday. Now he could explain his situation himself. By noon, my phone was buzzing constantly with calls from Kenneth. When I finally answered around 1 o'clock, his voice was frantic and angry. "What did you do? The electric company says the account was closed yesterday, and they won't restore service without a deposit I can't afford. This has your fingerprints all over it." "I closed my electric account when I moved out, just like you demanded," I said simply. "If you need electricity, you'll have to establish service in your name." The silence on the other end told me Kenneth was beginning to understand the implications of our new arrangement. "You can't just leave me without power in December," he said, his voice shifting from anger to something approaching desperation. "This is my home. I've been paying for everything." "Have you?" I interrupted. "When was the last time you actually paid an electric bill, Kenneth? Or a mortgage payment? Or any household expense beyond groceries?" The questions hung in the air, and I could practically hear his mind racing as he tried to formulate a response that didn't admit his complete financial dependence on me. "That's not the point," he said finally. "You lived here for over a year. You owe me." "I owe you nothing," I said firmly. "You made it very clear yesterday that I was a parasite contributing nothing to your household. Parasites don't typically pay their host's mortgage and utilities, so I'm confused about what exactly you think I owe you." The reality of his situation was starting to penetrate his anger, and I could hear his breathing becoming more labored. "Lucy, I didn't mean—" he started, but I cut him off. "You meant every word. You waited until after I covered all your December bills to kick me out on Christmas Day. You calculated the timing to ensure your holiday was comfortable before humiliating me in front of our family." My voice remained steady, but I could feel years of suppressed resentment flowing into my words. "The gas company is scheduled to disconnect service tomorrow," I continued. "Water gets shut off the day after that. You have approximately 48 hours to figure out how a 68-year-old man on an $1,800 retirement income plans to cover $3,400 in monthly expenses. I'm sure you'll manage just fine. After all, you've been supporting yourself this whole time, right?" The line went quiet for several long seconds before Kenneth spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "What have you done?" December 27th arrived with a bitter cold snap that sent temperatures plummeting into the teens. I was having breakfast at my hotel when my phone rang. Kenneth's name appeared on the screen, and this time I decided to answer. His voice was barely recognizable. Gone was the confident anger from yesterday, replaced by something approaching panic. "The gas is off," he said, without preamble. "The house is freezing, and they want a $400 deposit plus proof of income to restore service. Lucy, I need your help. I can't afford this." The desperation in his voice might have moved me 24 hours ago, but after being called a parasite on Christmas Day, I found myself remarkably unmoved by his predicament. That sounds challenging, I replied, continuing to eat my scrambled eggs. Have you considered getting a job to supplement your retirement income? I hear there are many opportunities for people willing to work hard. I threw his own words back at him, using the same condescending tone he had employed when discussing my consulting career. This isn't a joke, Kenneth snapped, some of his old anger returning. You can't just abandon me in winter. I'm your father, and I raised you better than this. You raised me to understand that actions have consequences, I said calmly. Yesterday, you made it very clear that you didn't want a parasite living in your house, contributing nothing, while you generously provided support. I'm simply giving you the independence you demanded. Isn't this what you wanted? I could hear him moving around the house, probably checking windows and doors to see how cold it was getting inside. I was angry about something else. You know I didn't mean those things about you being a parasite. What were you angry about? I asked. What exactly had I done to deserve being called names and thrown out on Christmas Day? The silence stretched on for nearly a minute, as Kenneth struggled to come up with an answer that didn't reveal the real reason for his outburst, his own shame about being financially dependent on his daughter. I don't remember exactly, he said finally, but we can work this out. Just call the utility companies and get everything turned back on. We'll figure out the money later. I don't have accounts with any utility companies, I said. Those were my personal accounts that I closed when I moved out. If you want utility service, you'll need to establish it yourself, in your name, with deposits and proof that you can afford the monthly payments. The reality was starting to sink in, and I could hear his breathing becoming more agitated. How am I supposed to prove I can afford payments when my income is only $1,800 a month? The question slipped out before he could stop himself, and we both knew he had just admitted what we both already knew. His retirement income couldn't support his lifestyle. That's an interesting problem, I said. How have you been managing to cover $3,400 in monthly expenses on $1,800 of income? That math doesn't seem to work out. The silence that followed was deafening. Kenneth was finally being forced to confront the reality he had been avoiding for over a year. His daughter hadn't been freeloading in his house. She had been subsidizing his entire existence while he convinced himself he was the generous provider. The mortgage payment is due January 1st, he said quietly. If I don't pay it, you'll face the same foreclosure process that anyone else would face, I finished. Welcome to the independence you've been craving, Kenneth. I hope it's everything you imagined it would be. I hung up the phone and returned to my breakfast, feeling no satisfaction in his panic, but also no guilt about my decision. Kenneth had chosen to treat me like a burden, while secretly depending on my financial support. Now he could discover what his life actually cost without someone he considered a parasite covering the bills. By December 28th, Kenneth was calling every hour. I had stopped answering, but his voicemails painted a clear picture of his rapidly deteriorating situation. The water's off now, he said in message number 7. I can't flush the toilet or take a shower. This is inhumane, Lucy. You can't treat your own father this way. Message number 12 was more desperate. I called the mortgage company. They say I'm already 30 days behind because no payment was made in December. How is that possible? You said you were taking care of things. The confusion in his voice was almost comical. Kenneth still hadn't grasped that I had been making the mortgage payments all along, not him. I was working from my hotel room when Beverly called, her voice tight with worry. Lucy, what's going on? Dad called asking to borrow money for utility deposits, but he won't explain why everything got shut off at once. He keeps saying it's some kind of mix-up, but 3 different companies don't make the same mistake simultaneously. Has he shown you his bank statements? I asked, or explained how he's been covering his monthly expenses on his retirement income. The silence on Beverly's end told me Kenneth hadn't shared the financial details with anyone in the family. He says he manages just fine, Beverly replied slowly. Are you telling me he doesn't? I'm telling you that his mortgage payment alone is $2,800 per month, I said. His retirement check is $1,800. You can do the math. I could hear Beverly's sharp intake of breath as the numbers sank in. Then how has he been? She started. Ask him, I interrupted. Ask Kenneth to show you exactly how he's been covering his mortgage, utilities, insurance, and other expenses for the past 14 months. Ask him to explain where that extra $2,000 per month has been coming from. When he's ready to tell the truth about who's been supporting whom, he can call me. On December 29th, Kenneth arrived at my hotel. I watched from my window as he climbed out of his old pickup truck, moving slowly in the frigid morning air. He looked older than his 68 years, worn down by 3 days of facing his financial reality without anyone to cushion the blow. When he knocked on my door, I let him in, curious to see how he would finally address the truth he had been avoiding. I need you to come home, he said without preamble, standing in my hotel doorway like a man delivering an ultimatum rather than asking for help. This has gone on long enough. We can talk through our differences, but you can't just abandon family when things get difficult. I didn't abandon anyone, I replied, gesturing for him to sit down. You threw me out, remember? On Christmas Day, in front of our family, after calling me a parasite who contributed nothing while you generously provided support. Those were your exact words, Kenneth. His face flushed red, but whether from cold or embarrassment I couldn't tell. I was having a bad day. The holidays are stressful and I said things I didn't mean. But we're family. We're supposed to forgive each other and work things out. Show me your bank statements, I said simply. What? Show me your checking account statements for the past year. Show me the mortgage payments you've been making, the utility bills you've been covering, the insurance premiums you've been paying. If you've truly been supporting me while I contributed nothing, the evidence should be right there in your financial records. Kenneth's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. We both knew what those bank statements would show, or more accurately, what they wouldn't show. He had never made a single mortgage payment, never paid a utility bill, never covered any household expense beyond groceries and his personal needs. I can't, he whispered finally, because the truth is that your parasite has been keeping you housed, heated, and financially afloat for over a year, I said quietly. And rather than acknowledging that reality, you chose to humiliate me at Christmas dinner to make yourself feel better about needing my help. Kenneth's shoulders sagged as the last of his defenses crumbled. What do you want me to do? I can't afford to live in that house without your help. I'll lose everything. The admission hung between us like a confession he had been avoiding for months. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you called the person saving your home a parasite, I replied. Actions have consequences, Kenneth. You wanted independence from your burden of a daughter. Congratulations. You got exactly what you asked for. I watched as the full weight of his situation settled on his shoulders. His Christmas cruelty had cost him everything, and there was no taking back words that had revealed his true character. The man who had raised me to believe that kindness and respect were fundamental values had thrown both away in a moment of misplaced pride, and now he was learning that some mistakes carry prices too high to afford. Looking at my father sitting broken in that hotel chair, I realized that the most expensive lesson of his life was just beginning, and I was finally free from subsidizing someone who had confused my love with weakness. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give ungrateful people is the reality check of experiencing life without the support they took for granted. Kenneth faced immediate foreclosure proceedings when the January mortgage payment never materialized, forcing him to sell his house at a loss during the worst possible market conditions and move into a subsidized senior housing complex across town. His reputation within our extended family was permanently damaged when the truth emerged about how he had treated me while I was secretly covering all his bills, making him appear both cruel and delusional to relatives who had witnessed his Christmas outburst. Kenneth's pride prevented him from ever asking for my help again, and his attempts to reconcile were met with polite but firm boundaries, as I had learned the difference between being generous and being exploited. The housing crisis he faced became a cautionary tale among his friends about the importance of appreciating family support. while Kenneth spent his remaining years in a cramped apartment, haunted by the knowledge that his own words had destroyed the comfortable life his daughter had provided. As I celebrated the new year in my new apartment in Richmond, surrounded by clients who valued my expertise and friends who appreciated my generosity, I reflected on how Kenneth's Christmas cruelty had ultimately freed me from enabling someone who saw kindness as weakness, proving that sometimes the most valuable gift we can give ourselves is the courage to let ungrateful people experience the true cost of their words.